On Friday afternoon, the glass-walled lounge at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions froze when the quiet employee Rachel Carter took the blast of a soda can right in the chest. The liquid ran down her gray cardigan, pooling on the pricey carpet, while account manager Jessica Hayes flashed a razor-sharp grin. "Need a shower?" she said, drawing laughs from Mark, who still shoved Rachel's chair, and from Lauren, who was filming everything on her phone to show later. The laughter sounded like blades. Every sticky drop on her clothes reminded Rachel that to this high-heeled, big-ego crew, she was an intruder. She didn't topple, though. She squared her shoulders and swept the room with a look that shut the chatterboxes up. Behind the shy gleam of her glasses, something impossible to ignore was growing. The certainty that the game would change in seconds. From the hallway, the elevator announced the arrival of Nathan Pierce, Rachel's husband, and to everyone's dismay, the billionaire who bankrolled a good chunk of the agency's contracts. The metallic slide of the doors brought a sharp silence, like everyone held their breath at once. With slow steps, Rachel crossed the still wet floor and stopped at the reception desk. Just a half-smile tugged at her lips. The Storm building had a name, an address, and scores to settle. And it would start right there under those cold office lights. Early that morning during the daily meeting, Rachel had settled in quietly at the end of the table, focused on her notes. In the middle of talk about deadlines and campaigns, Jessica raised her voice to grab attention. With a crooked smile, she said Rachel's sweater looked like something borrowed from her grandma's closet. Little giggles bubbled up around the room, and Rachel felt heat rise to her face. Her first instinct was to stay silent. All she wanted was to finish the data analysis and get on with the day. But Jessica wasn't satisfied. Before lunch, she rallied her backup crew. Mark Reynolds, always with gel in his hair and convinced he was the top salesman, and Lauren Kim, a junior designer who lived for counting her likes on social media. They walked up to Rachel's desk, pretending to discuss some project, but quickly switched to teasing. Mark raised his voice so anyone nearby could hear and asked if she'd taken the bus again, hinting he'd seen someone just like her asking for spare change outside. Lauren, saying little, lifted her phone and, focusing on Rachel's worn purse, whispered a sarcastic #thrift-store-chic. Rachel stayed steady in her chair, trying not to show how much it bothered her. She knew firing back would only feed the jokes, and deep down she preferred to focus on her tasks. While she set her pen on the notebook, pretending nothing was happening, she felt Jessica's eyes on her. Talking back was tempting, but the room didn't feel safe. So, with a held-in sigh, she went back to punching numbers into the spreadsheet, unsure if this was the smartest way to cope or just the easiest way to hide. Rachel stopped typing when the keys trembled under her fingers. Her neck warmed, but she held back the urge to reply. She was there to decode numbers, find patterns, and turn cold columns into stories that would guide decisions. Pinnacle had hired that analytical mind, not a craving to fit in, and she reminded herself of that every morning to push through the day. Still, the squeeze had been tightening since month one. It started with looks when she pulled her lunch out of her bag and snickers when they spotted the same jacket again. Then came Jessica's coffee spilled over freshly sorted reports, and Mark's comment, "Start over, Cinderella." That night, a snarky tweet from Lauren zipped through the team. Some folks don't know their place, their office life. At 3 this afternoon, the attack turned physical. Jessica strutted down the hallway like a runway, dumped a stack of folders on Rachel's desk, and smiled. "Review all this by the end of the day. Tomorrow's presentation needs someone with spare time." Inside were old spreadsheets, undated charts, useless papers. Rachel flipped through the pile, her stomach twisting, and still nudged it 2 centimeters away from the keyboard. In a controlled voice, she said, "I have my own deadlines." The silence that followed felt too wide for that cubicle. A tiny tremor ran through the space as if everyone was waiting for the next move. Jessica narrowed her eyes. "Don't act like you're hot stuff. Everyone knows you're just keeping a seat warm," she spat. "No friends, no degree, what are you even doing here?" Mark leaned against the divider and added, "Rachel's our charity case. Probably lives in a damp basement with strangers." Laughs jumped over the partitions. Onlookers popped up, hungry for drama. Rachel's hands shook, but she laced her fingers and fixed her gaze on the monitor. Lauren lifted her phone, always chasing an audience. "Say hi to my followers. They want to see who buys shoes at the dollar store." The lens ran over Rachel's worn-out flats. Lauren cackled and posted the video. The floor seemed to slide. The air thickened. Rachel's heart raced, yet her face stayed calm, hazel eyes steady. She knew that if she clapped back, she'd hand them the win. If she stayed silent, she'd become a legend or a shadow. That dilemma pulsed while the cascade of hair, tied in a simple ponytail, brushed her hot neck. Notifications popped on Lauren's phone. The likes fed a crowd growing like mold on the padded office walls. Jessica smiled, sure she ruled. Mark folded his arms, pleased with the script. Rachel inhaled, tasting the metallic hint of fear, but she didn't give in. A click on save closed one window and opened another, invisible to those laughing. Inside it, a decision was forming, razor sharp, waiting for the exact moment to burst the superiority bubble choking the room. Rachel kept her eyes on the screen, trying not to get distracted by the office bustle. She never looked for applause. She preferred to let the spreadsheet speak for her. But that afternoon, the hallway filled with a heavy hush when Brian Foster showed up. The team leader wore the same smile he used to mask his insecurities. "Carter, if your performance drops, the door's right there," he blurted, slapping a crumpled post-it with a rushed, "do better" on her desk. The collective laugh was instant. Jessica even snapped her fingers like someone scoring a point. Rachel drew a breath, stood up, and adjusted her badge. The movement was slow, steady, so precise it hushed the crowd for a moment. "My work will be delivered ahead of schedule," she said in an even tone. "As always." Without waiting for a reply, she crossed the open space to the break room. She still heard Mark whisper something about sensitive little princesses. She didn't react. The cold tile under her fingertips on the counter offered the support she lacked. She grabbed her phone, the screen trembled along with her hands. She scrolled through her contacts until she stopped at Nathan's name. She remembered the frenzy at Pierce Enterprises, the meetings piling up in his time zone. She thought about ditching the call, but something in the memory of the post-it made her square her shoulders. Green ring. Her heart sped up. If Brian thought he could bury her under snide notes, he didn't yet know the reach of a decision made in silence. In Chicago, the last name Pierce was splashed across headlines and boardrooms. Nathan, the billionaire who built his own empire, chaired the Pinnacle holding company and influenced half the country. To Rachel, though, he was still just Nate, the man who, 3 years earlier, had knelt in an almost empty park and offered her a ring he'd designed himself. She never used that calling card. She preferred her co-workers to see her as the analyst who earned her spot, not as the shadow of a tycoon. Since college, when he sketched bold projects and she turned numbers into solutions, they had forged a quiet pact. Each would succeed on their own. The wedding reflected that, an intimate ceremony. Family, a few friends, no photographer. At Pinnacle, Rachel still signed with her maiden name. Nathan found it amusing and called it charming stubbornness. Today, though, it wasn't funny. She closed the laptop, feeling her heart hammer in her ears, and dialed his number. Her thumb hovered a second before hitting call. "Ra, what happened?" His steady voice gave her a moment of shelter in the storm. "They crossed the line, Nate. I don't know how much longer I can take it." The silence that followed took on a strange weight until it broke in a firm tone. "What floor are you on?" "Still in the office." "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Stay put." The line went dead. Rachel stared at the trembling reflection in the dark screen, aware that any moment the door would open. In Chicago, the name Nathan Pierce packed headlines and boardrooms. A self-made billionaire, he chaired Pinnacle's holding company and controlled much of the money driving the Midwest. To Rachel, though, he was just Nate, the husband of 3 years who had offered her a ring box in a quiet park after sketching the jewel himself. At work, she never mentioned his last name. It wasn't shame. It was discipline. She intended to earn her space without riding on someone else's fame. They met in college long before the fortune. He was the determined student with big plans. She, the freshman math major who rescued his stats GPA. The wedding was intimate. Family, a few friends, no gossip columnists. On her badge, Rachel kept her maiden name, a choice Nate respected while teasing her stubbornness. Now, though, her self-confidence was crumbling. The day had ended like a punch. She took a deep breath, unlocked her phone, and with a trembling thumb found his contact. One ring was enough. "Ra, are you okay?" he asked, voice steady. "No. It was awful. They treated me like I was worthless," she murmured, swallowing her anger. Half a second of silence. "Where are you?" "At the office, Pinnacle. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Stay put." The call dropped before she could protest. The beep was still echoing when she realized that, for the first time that afternoon, her heart was beating at a calmer pace. Rachel returned to her station with the resolve of someone who knows the next attack is coming. Jessica stayed planted in front of her monitor, arms crossed, wearing a smirk of disdain. Mark and Lauren orbited like well-dressed vultures, while Brian, behind the glass, watched the show to kill the boredom. Rachel powered up her computer without raising her voice. The silence in the room smelled like a storm. 9 minutes passed before the elevator dinged. The metallic chime was the last sound before everything plunged into thick silence. Nathan Pierce strode through the doors with measured steps and a straight posture. Tall, impeccable charcoal suit, expression of someone who doesn't negotiate. His mere presence seemed to compress the air. Jessica swallowed her words. Mark went pale. Lauren's phone slipped from her fingers and bounced on the carpet. Nathan didn't check the effect he had. He walked straight to Rachel's desk, imposing another wave of silence. He stopped beside the chair, leaned in, and spoke in a low voice that filled the room. "Rachel, shall we?" She looked up. The tension locking her shoulders dissolved in a muffled sigh. Even so, she kept her focus on the screen for a moment, fingers steady on the mouse. "Let me log the files and I'm ready," she answered. The buzz in the sales department stopped cold when the elevator doors slid open. Rachel hurriedly gathered her reports, trying to hide yet another day of quiet humiliation. Out stepped a tall man in a dark gray suit, his eyes sweeping the room like a scanner. Before anyone could react, he'd already chosen his target. Jessica Hayes, the account manager, flashed her usual plastic smile and strode forward with the practiced steps of someone born to flatter executives. "Mr. Pierce? What a surprise. Coffee? Water?" He didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on Rachel, who looked up. Then he turned slowly, as if filing away every face for later. "Who thought it was a good idea to torment my wife?" The word wife echoed through the open space like an alarm. Jessica's smile melted. Mark choked on his energy drink. Lauren turned pale. Brian tripped over his chair while tugging at his tie. Jessica blinked, puzzled by Rachel's plain cardigan. "Wife?" "Rachel Pierce," Nathan clarified, his voice steady. "We're here to settle some scores. Anyone want to start?" Silence took over. Rachel stepped forward half a pace, proud, unshowy. Nothing in her face hinted at revenge, only the certainty of someone who's done being invisible. Sweat popped on Brian's forehead. He fought for breath. "Mr. Pierce, there must be some mistake. Rachel is very valued by us." "Valued?" Nathan cut in, his voice bouncing off the glass walls. "After weeks of being ridiculed, overworked, and treated like she's invisible? Does that sound valued?" Jessica edged back, words tripping over themselves. "We didn't know. She never—" "Did she need to say it?" he snapped. "She came here to work, not to flaunt anyone's status. Still, you judged her worth by the label on the purse she didn't carry. That's all on you." Mark opened his mouth, swallowed hard, and gave up. Lauren stared at the carpet, her influencer dream crumbling. Brian wiped his forehead, but the sweat clung stubbornly like guilt. Nathan turned to Rachel. "Stay, or are we done?" Her gaze was calm, the answer inevitable. "We're done." He turned back to the group, closing a door with one motion. "Listen up. Jessica Hayes, Mark Reynolds, Lauren Kim, Brian Foster, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security's on the way to escort you out. Thinking of applying somewhere else? Go ahead. My last name opens doors, but it also slams them, and today they just slammed shut for you." The silence hanging in the air wasn't simply a lack of sound. It was the weight of having underestimated the wrong person, crashing down like a verdict. Jessica gasped, bracing herself on a desk. "You can't do this. I control the board that runs this company." Nathan, still calm. "Yes, I can." Brian leaned in, trying to soften the blow. "Sir, I've been here 5 years, and watched everything fall apart right under your nose." Nathan shot back. "You're out." Jessica spun toward Rachel. Her palms hit the desk. The mug rattled. "Oh, so now you think you're better than us? We always knew you were a front, showing up in those worn-out clothes to play the working girl while we carried the load. Bet you laughed behind our backs when we called your life mediocre." Panic-stricken, Mark piled on. "Total fake. You got that ring hopping from bed to bed." The words sliced through the air. The whole office held its breath. Rachel stayed still, a calm that highlighted the ugliness of their voices, even as each word cut deep. Nathan moved forward, forming a wall in front of her. He raised his hand. "Enough. You won't twist the facts to hide your fear. My wife doesn't have to prove anything. She's got talent, courage, integrity. You pointed fingers, called her weak, mocked her for months. Look now. The strength you underestimated is intact, while the ground disappears under your feet." When Nathan turned back to Rachel, the hardness melted into quiet pride. "You owe them nothing," he murmured. "They're finished." 2 security guards glided down the hallway. The 4 tried to protest, but their voices hit the marble and died. Jessica cried. Mark cursed. Lauren packed her things. Brian stood frozen, watching his future drain toward the open elevator. Co-workers hunched behind cubicles stayed silent after Nathan's final line. "You won't work here, or anywhere else." That's the price for messing with her. He took Rachel's hand with a gentleness that contrasted with the storm he'd stirred. They walked to the elevator, light steps on gray carpet. Before the doors shut, Rachel looked, not at the fired quartet, but at those who'd chosen silence. In the restrained shine of her hazel eyes, there was less anger than conviction, a reminder that simplicity isn't weakness. In the weeks that followed, the building buzzed with whispers. People discovered the quiet woman was married to Nathan Pierce, the billionaire who built Pierce Enterprises from nothing. The quartet's careers turned to dust. Jessica's tear-stained post racked up hollow likes. Mark bounced between shaky jobs. Lauren wiped her digital trail. Brian vanished from the industry, known only as a cautionary tale. Since leaving Pinnacle, Rachel forged her own path. She chose the freedom of freelance contracts, lending her talent to neighborhood bakeries, online used bookshops, and studios that just needed a gentle push to grow. Nathan stayed by her side, attentive, proud, never eclipsing the woman he admired for her steadiness. On a Friday that smelled of rain over Lake Michigan, they climbed to the rooftop with 2 steaming mugs. The sky, washed in copper, framed Chicago's skyline. Rachel pulled her sweater closer and leaned against Nathan's chest. "You didn't have to knock anyone down," she murmured, almost a sigh. "They dug their own hole," he said, kissing her forehead. "I just shoveled the last bit of dirt." She laughed, not out of scorn, but relief. Her hazel eyes caught distant neon reflections, reminders of sleepless nights filled with doubt. Now those doubts felt small. Rachel had faced toxic mentors, absurd targets, meetings where her voice was a footnote. She survived without asking permission. She grew without apologizing. Nathan squeezed her fingers, a sign he was ready for whatever came next. Rachel nodded lightly, already thinking about the next client to discover. While the city lights blinked, their story, far from closing a chapter, was only turning the key to the next door. So, did you enjoy this chapter? If you did, smash that like button right now. It helps the channel bring you more stories like today's. Share the video with someone who could use a shot of courage and drop a comment below telling us what hit you the hardest. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next episode of this journey that's just getting started. Thanks for hanging out, and see you soon.